Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. It's the afternoon of Friday, September 5th, 2014. We're just viewing the conclusion of the NATO summit, a monstrous festival of war psychosis, bellicose rhetoric by a gang of discredited, desperate demagogues led by perhaps the most discredited demagogue of them all, Hollande, marking the complete Sorosification of the Socialist International. Hollande now basking at 13% popularity, and not far behind him in the race to the bottom, Cameron, Colonel Blimp, Perfide Albion, personified, and his friend Clegg, who of course is virtually moribund with the Liberal Democrats, right? Liberal Party destroyed itself under Lloyd George in World War I, and it looks like it's going to do it again. Big question for the U.S. The British dragged you into World War I. The British dragged you into World War II. It was a little bit more complicated. But now you're going to let the British drag you into World War III? Perfide, no. And the big news, of course, from the NATO summit is the creation of a new rapid deployment force, or rapid response force in the rhetoric of the effete Cameron. The withered mummy of British imperialism struts and frets another hour on the stage, right? And the fact that this is allowed to go on indicates degeneracy, decadence, and the fecklessness of Obama, who should have pushed this entire congeries off the stage, right? Die Weltmachtruinen, the ruins of what had once been world powers. Weltmachtruine England, Weltmachtruine Frankreich. That's what we're viewing, and we've had enough of this stuff. And this is from the good old American point of view, right? We were told this week by the Atlantic Council that the Ukrainian people get to decide whether they join NATO. Not so fast, because the American people get to say, no, we're not interested in your quarrels. We don't like your fascist, tin-horn, demagogic leadership there, Poroshenko and Yats the rats. We're sick of these people. But now we've got Cameron's invention. Cameron is the one responsible. He's claiming responsibility, and nobody denies it. Cameron has been pressing for months to get the resurrection, right, the exhuming of the NATO rapid deployment force, rapid response force now. And he says this will be a spearhead. Well, as my friend Tony Gosling said on Russia Today, a spearhead is the leading edge of an attack force, right? The Russians know this. They used to have a spearhead of about 75,000 troops, a shock army in East Germany, and that was going to roll all the way to the Channel, right? That was the Udar maneuver that they held every year. But now you look at it and say, well, this is not exactly an Udar with 3,500 British. I'm sure there'll be a lot of gherkins in there, right? They'll bring in some gherkins from the Raj, right, left over. They had them in the Falklands, right, the Malvinas. So it's going to be a spearhead, and this thing was abolished in 2002, and now it's being exhumed. So I say to Obama, stay a million miles away from this. As Professor Cohen points out on the Amy Goodman show today, the existence of that in itself ridiculous rapid response force is, of course, a cover for building up NATO bases in far, far eastern Europe. Specifically, Cameron is talking about a force that will have a base. The headquarters will be in Warsaw, Poland, or somewhere in Poland. And then the bases will be out in the Baltic states, in eastern Poland, and such. So this is a recipe for disaster. It is made to order for the provocateurs that are known to inhabit the British Foreign Office, the British Defense Ministry. And as we have pointed out, you've got this warmonger wing of NATO, the British, Poland, and then the three Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, right? We heard from Poland this week. Prime Minister Tusk, who's going on to preside over the European Union, big anti-Russian number. Don't forget the guy's father was a Nazi. His grandfather was a Nazi. So Tusk comes from a Nazi family. And this Harpy Grybauskaitė, the woman there from Lithuania, right? She should be told to shut up. These are all Maulhelder. They're all people who talk big. And who's going to bleed is poor Americans, inner city blacks, Appalachian poor. That's who's going to die in the war that these Eastern European virulently Russophobic demagogues are trying to foist on us. Britain, Poland, and the three Baltic states, if states we can call them. A terrible mistake to let these people into NATO. A time bomb left ticking by Mad Dog Bush the Younger. That's the admission of these three virulently Russophobic Baltic states to NATO, right? You know, foreign policy is all based on Russophobia. Big Russian minorities, 25-30%. Mistreat them. Plenty of opportunities. You can drive the Russian public opinion crazy, and then you get your war. It's time to pull the disconnect button. Abort, abort, abort. No rapid deployment force is desirable. So war psychosis was in the air in Newport, Wales for this ridiculous event. Venomous rhetoric flying all over the place. The various heads of government and heads of state had themselves photographed in front of a jet fighter, right? Was it an F-16? What was it, right? Were they trying to sell the F-35 or some similar thing, right? So all kinds of bellicose martial posturing. And of course, most of these countries on the military level are totally insignificant. 3/4 of anything is going to come from the U.S. Let's get it clear. So the U.S. has veto power over these images, these simulacra of states, right? Staatsgebilde. And we're fed up with this. In the course of the week, we had Yatsenyuk, Yats the Rats, Nuland's friend. He wants to end the neutral status of Ukraine and join NATO. And I've already said the American people say no, so forget it. You should solve your own problems. We can't have this coming into NATO. We're told that more sanctions are in the works. Well, more sanctions will quite possibly come just in time. They'll coincide with a moment of exaggerated weakness or typical weakness in the Western financial system. Are we looking at some kind of an September-October crash? Is this possible? I think we now, quite a few years after 2007, 2008, we've got to think about this again. I'll try to get to it as we have time. Merkel is not exactly a profile in courage, is she? There is this other group in NATO, right? It's called Germany, France, Italy, Spain. It's a large group. They're not interested in confrontation. But where are they? We saw some of them cavorting there, right? Where are they? Why don't they stand up and say, look, this has gone far enough? And we're also told that U.S. forces are going to go there. I had tweeted during the week, and I'll get to this in just a second, what I tweeted during the week. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Notice that little Rand Paul has flipped on his isolationist anti-war rhetoric. Rand Paul, ever sensitive to the humors of the Fascisto-Republican Party, is now a full-fledged warmonger. How embarrassing for certain personalities to see Rand Paul unmasked as a warmonger. The question from Bloomberg today was, who is this guy anyway, right? He flips and flops. He's against drones. He's for drones. He's anti-war. Total opportunism. So if that's what you want, and he's not even a blank slate because he's taken all kinds of positions. We'll be back to that in a minute. I detect the rumblings of Romney. Romney may be at the gates again. Get that book, Just Too Weird, Tarpley.net, and you'll be forearmed. But now the Rapid Trident is coming. This is what I had in my Twitter feed during the week. Rapid Trident is now confirmed. It's a NATO exercise on the ground in Ukraine, as I had suspected. And you heard this from Perfide Cameron in the House of Commons, and he said in passing, and by the way, we'll have forces there for an exercise in Ukraine before the end of the year. That's Rapid Trident. The last one we had, Sea Breeze or Breeze, back in July, was the cover for the shooting down of the MH17 Malaysian airliner, Yabol. And not good, huh? So what's Rapid Trident going to be the cover for? Cohen, usefully, pointed out to Amy Goodman, who was gaping, that the entire evidence, right, there is no report on the Malaysian airliner. The report is conducted by a consortium, including the Australian and Dutch governments, U.S. allies, warmongers, British puppets in the case of both, and they're blocking any release of the report. So the information is worthy of being suppressed, and the Ukrainians, for their part, are suppressing the tapes coming from Kiev Airport Tower, where, of course, we have that interesting Spanish air traffic controller. So you're going to go to war on the basis of hearsay? I've been trying to show you what a fraud Sarajevo was. Check my broadcast this week on rents, and you will hear the story of the British pre-1914, pre-August 1914 ops. Now, this morning we're told that there is a ceasefire between the Poroshenko-Yatsenyuk gang on the one side and the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk on the other. This took place in the city of Minsk. I guess the good offices of the Belarus government were called into play. Russia had tried to point out earlier in the week that they are not a party to the civil war in Ukraine. This is a Ukrainian show with both sides being aided from outside. But now we have the ceasefire. Most opinion, I think, is that this is simply a pause to regroup for both sides, and in particular, the ones who needed the regrouping were the Kiev fascist forces. By my count, off the maps I've been able to see, there were 7 pockets, 7 encirclements of Kiev fascist forces in the eastern Ukrainian area, meaning that those forces were on their way to annihilation. And we were thinking back to Stalingrad. What else can you say, right? The encirclements. When von Paulus at Stalingrad was surrounded, right? Hitler made him a field marshal, and that accompanied the order, you must never surrender. So we had, instead of Hitler this week, we had Poroshenko, a reasonable facsimile. Poroshenko told the Ukrainian forces who were pocketed that they should fight to the death and they should not surrender for the greater glory of Poroshenko. Now, in terms of the terminology, you hear this stuff described as a cauldron. Cauldron is the back translation, I think, from via Russian of the German Kessel. These are Kesselschlacht events. In English, it's a pocket, as in the Falaise pocket. So we have 7 pockets of Ukraine fascist forces over there. Now, at the same time, though, given the humiliation and the defeat of the Kiev fascist clique, you've got right sector, and this is Yarosh, but it's now Yarosh. Yarosh is another little Hitler running around there, but it's Yarosh as the puppet of Kolomoiski. Kolomoiski is now the extreme fascist wing. He's like Qatar in the Arab Spring. Kolomoiski is to the Ukrainian fascist constellation. And you can see that what they have in mind is this. since Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk are discredited, they've also got, by the way, Yatsenyuk has got problems. The International Monetary Fund paid a tranche, almost $2 billion, I guess, on the promised loans to Ukraine. But the IMF then said, you won't get any more tranches of this money unless and until you implement our reforms, which means all that stuff, right? Sell off the Black Earth, sell off the pipelines, sell off Krivoy Rog, sell off the Donetsk, destroy the social safety net, bust all the unions, and on, double the price of gas, all things that would tend to accelerate the disintegration of the Kiev fascist regime. So, given all that, the Yarosh Kolomoiski, maybe we're talking about the difference between Nazis and fascists, right? Something like that. The government fascist and these Kolomoiski people more on the National Socialist wing. They are marching, concentrating at least in Kiev for what looks to me like an attempt at a second revolution. And you'll remember what this means. Hitler took power in January 1933, but by the spring, summer of 1934, we had Ernst Röhm, R-O-H-M, and his SA brown shirts, the proletarian wing, who were clamoring for a second revolution where the army generals, the bankers, the politicians would all be thrown out and these plebeian Nazis would be put in. And this, of course, led to Hitler pulling the night of the long knives, where he massacred all these people. His lawyer, Carl Schmitt, defended all this in court. And it seems like it may be heading in that direction. Imagine if you get a civil war or mini civil war breaking out in Kiev in the middle of all this. Won't that be embarrassing for the pro-Western forces, right? For NATO in particular, since they bet everything on this. You notice that Obama hears no fascists, sees no fascists, doesn't smell any. His speech in Estonia, a wretched performance. We'll be back in a minute. Radio, want to thank the distinguished radio personality Lionel, until recently, I think, of WPAX Channel 11 in New York, formerly on Air America, very well known, made some very nice remarks about yours truly. So we thank Lionel, and you can find him at Lionel Media, and you can find Lionel Media on Twitter. And we hope to talk to him. Maybe we can get him on here to talk to our audience when we get into the hot stove season here in November and December, after our big election struggles are over. Now, the question right now, city of Mariupol, right? A pro-Russian column is advancing towards Mariupol. Notice that the people defending are the Azov battalion. These are absolute, outright declared Nazis with the Wolfsangel, with the Black Sun, and they've got essentially a kind of European SS. They got snipers from Sweden. They got French fascists, Foreign Legion veterans, I suppose. And they're all over there in Mariupol trying to keep the pro-Russian forces out. I think it's a question of time now until Mariupol is liberated from the fascists. Now, let me also point out, right, this whole thing, the Ukrainian army was defeated. 7 of their main units pocketed and on their way to annihilation. Pattern was, as we went through, artillery by the Ukrainian regular army from the outside, and then the Einsatzgruppen were sent in. Those would be the right sector, described now as National Guard, and they're getting massacred. So that's the resentment of the right sector, Pravi sector, against the constituted government now, bandit regime in Kiev. Notice now, though, in terms of the dynamics inside NATO, warmongers, we have 2 politicians in particular, Hollande and Cameron, who are acting as warmongers according to the time-honored formula: if you're in trouble at home, create a war. Remember, in July 1914 and August 1914, Great Britain was widely thought to be on the verge of civil war. And the question was Ireland. The Irish Catholic provinces, right, in other words, non-Ulster, wanted at least home rule, right? They wanted independence, but the only way to to dodge that was home rule. So there was a home rule law that was going to be put in by the liberal government of Asquith and the unspeakable Earl Grey. And that was coming to a head in May, June, July of 1914. And it was thought the Ulstermen were opposed to this. So the Ulstermen were saying, we'll fight. We'll pick up arms and we'll fight. And the grave danger was that the officer corps of the British Land Army, right, always inferior in social status to the Navy, the senior service, the Ulster officers of the British Army were thought to be unreliable. They might go over to the Ulster side and stop the central government under Asquith and the Liberal Party from establishing home rule in Southern Ireland while keeping Ulster under direct British controlled administration. Right? That was the the compromise that they were trying to work out. Well, then let's look at it from a sort of political point of view. Right? Let's look at Hollande first. It's more fun. His former wife, Madame Trierweiler, she has put out a book where she reveals that Hollande says he hates the poor because he's always accused of hating the rich. No, she says that's all eyewash, right? He hates the poor, and he told me so. Hollande calls poor people the toothless ones. Are you toothless? Then Hollande doesn't like you. An insult to French dentists. There's another group that he lost. He's down to 13% popularity after this, and it's being published everywhere. It's going to be a bestseller everywhere in the world. And then on the other side, Cameron, of course, very unpopular, austerity ghoul. And think about, in order to govern, he's got to have this Liberal Democrat Party. This guy Clegg, this character is practically entombed in this government. So he's extremely unpopular. And this Scottish referendum is coming up now. I certainly would like to see Cameron out. I would warn people in Scotland, do not vote for this fake independence of Scotland. This is a fraud. This is a Bantustan you'll be getting. That will not be an independent country by any stretch of the imagination. It will be the kind of thing that was used for counterinsurgency purposes under British traditions in South Africa. The Bantustans, self-administration, autogestion, practically self-management for this area. You will still have the Queen. You'll still have the Bank of England. You'll probably still have the European Union. You still have NATO. If you're lucky, it's not independence. It's a fraud. And, of course, what it would then do is to solidify England as a completely reactionary state, which would then be even more of a warmonger force than it is right now, right? It would be Colonel Blimp in person as Prime Minister. All right. So this is the situation. Kiev is near financial collapse, and the war psychosis everywhere in the Wales summit. Now, the ISIS. One of the things Obama did, he used his trip to Estonia to talk about ISIS. The smart play for Obama would have been direct the hysteria against ISIS in Iraq and try to use that to crowd the other stuff out. But he's not responding these days. And, of course, Obama is risking impeachment and God knows what if he goes down this garden path. So we've now had the second U.S. Journalist killed. Sotloff, apparently, allegedly, reportedly executed after Foley. Remember, these were people who went over there with the idea of writing pro-terrorist articles against Assad. And remember this interesting parallel now with Foley. Foley had been saying that he was in Aleppo and he found that the rebels were unpopular and there was nostalgia for Assad. Then he was kidnapped and killed. In the case of Sotloff, his last tweet was that Nusra rebel forces from Syria had been arrested in Turkey for having sarin gas, and then he disappeared. Right. So the idea is these were in many ways ideological people or mercenary people who were originally trying to help the terrorist side. There's no other way to put it. And then when they see what is actually going on, as distinct from the media narrative, then their lives are in danger. So the idea there is don't go over there. The ceasefire, I guess the details, stop the shooting, move the heavy artillery back, and let humanitarian corridors in, and maybe let these pocketed people out. That I don't know. It's a regroupment. I think it's simply a pause, and look for this stuff to look more like war in the near future. But we got to stick with the caliphate now. Remember, the caliphate, there's some confusion on NPR. The caliphate means the empire, and the caliphate does not mean that you get a vast swath of territory. The caliphate, the demand of the caliphate is to rule the entire world, everything. That is the translatio imperii, the moving of the seat of empire, right? It was in Constantinople until 1920. They're now saying we've had a translatio imperii to the new imperial capital of Raqqa, from which we will rule the world. Now, of course, their ability to rule the world is limited, but this you can see what the NPR clowns are doing. Now, the other thing about it is the U.S. hype. Is it ISIS? Oh, my God, their prowess. They're so sophisticated. Now we have an interesting article in the Washington Post. They're a collection of psychotic patsies, of labile misfits, of sociopaths. We're told about an Australian jihadi working for ISIS who is a severe schizophrenic. He's in the tradition of Musawi and Richard Reed, the shoe bomb. Musawi described as schizophrenic. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now we're going to begin our panorama of struggle, and what better place to begin than Benton Harbor, Michigan. And Reverend Edward Pinkney, you'll remember as of last week, we were waiting to see what would happen in terms of that recall election against the the appointed mayor, Hightower, in reality an agent of the Whirlpool Corporation and of Wall Street. And what's going to happen to Reverend Pinkney, right, who's also under the gun of all kinds of trumped up, framed up charges. So, Reverend, welcome and tell us what's going on.
Webster, I tell you, you won't believe it again. We just got the call back from the appeal court on yesterday that the election is off again.
Off again? No election?
It is off again. They didn't give any reason. They just said that they're taking the election off the table. Nobody will believe this. See, a lot of people don't understand how important this is, because the ratification of this is just not in the city of Benton Harbor. It's across the nation. And we're talking about when a person signed a petition twice, they believe that you should strike both of them out. But according to their website, you should only strike one. And that's the Court of Appeal, which is corporation, and we know who they are. They ruled in favor of Whirlpool and all their attorneys. Even the Attorney General filed a brief for the clerk and stating that you must strike this down because it will destroy the whole state of Michigan. That's what they're talking about. Nobody would believe this. Nobody would believe this. And I tell you, but here's what we're doing. We're going to the Supreme Court now.
You're saying the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., Reverend?
Yes.
Good.
We're coming there. We're going to the Supreme Court because it's a constitutional issue more than anything else. And
Good.
we're going to show them what we're capable of doing. Also, the clerk said on yesterday that she did not request any money for this appeal, which is a lie, an outright lie. She knew that she wouldn't come. We was there when she asked for the $20,000 to pursue this matter. So we're dealing with something that's so amazing here in the city of Benton Harbor. You have to be here because you just can't make this stuff up. It's happening, Webster. But here's what we need your people to do, people that's listening. We got to get to the Supreme Court. We don't have the funds to get there. We need people to send money. You can mail a check to Banco, 1940 Union Avenue, Benton Harbor, Michigan, 49022, or go to my website, which is bhbanco.org. We need funds to get this thing to the Supreme Court, because we're going to the Supreme Court. We're going to let them make the decision. Even if we have to put up our homes or wherever it is, we need the money to get there to fight back. Because it's just not about Benton Harbor. It's about this whole country. So that's where we at. Webster, I tell you, we've been battling this thing. This has been a fight with no money. And we've been going toe to toe and chest to chest with these corporations. Fascism is here, whether we like it or not. They're controlling.
All right, Reverend. That's it's good news that you're fighting so hard. Now, what I've understood is this is what they call an interlocutory appeal from the Michigan State Court of Appeals to the United States Supreme Court here in Washington, right, on Capitol Hill. And, of course, this is expensive. One thing that I know of from previous tips with these guys, you've got to have your case specially printed in advance. There are typesetting, printer shops, typography shops on Capitol Hill that their business is mainly to print the case, because you've got to present this printed in a special format and then at least, bound together a little bit so these guys can read it. And it's expensive. So I would join my voice to that. Please, people, this is worth doing. They used to say, work within the system, take part in democratic elections. And now there are no democratic elections, at least as a tendency, right? So this is the front line of civil rights, democratic rights, constitutional rights, human rights. This is it. So please join the Reverend.
Absolutely. And we really, really need your support on this, because, like I said, we're not giving up. We're not quitters. And even the much as the corporate newspaper hate the people here in Benton Harbor for fighting, they're saying right now, well, Reverend Pinckney, he just, but it's not just Reverend Pinckney. That's what I need people to understand. We have an organization that stands up behind Reverend Pinckney. So we're a group, but they want to just throw my name out there and eliminate everybody else. But we need folks to come in and support us, and we definitely need it financially.
All right. So what I'd like you to do, Reverend, is tell us, let's assume that you succeed and the election goes on. Can you tell us a little bit about your candidate? I think it's Mr. Mohammed.
Yes, Marcus Muhammad.
Tell us something about him so people get an idea, because I think they might be interested in supporting him too. Absolutely.
He was the head basketball coach here. He was a basketball player for the team that went to the state championship. Excellent brother, a teacher, more of a businessman, business-minded, and a personal love for the community. And I think if you're going to do anything to be successful, the first thing you have to have a love for the community. And I believe that he has just that. And we're supporting him 100%. And we're going to do all the things we can to make sure he wins. Even if the election would have went on May 6th, he would have won by a landslide. If the election would have went on November the 4th, he would have won by a landslide. And that's what they're afraid of. This corporate world out here do not want this young man in there, because he's more for the people than it's the puppet mayor we have now.
All right, so basically there are two phases, right? One is the fight to have the election, and the second phase is to get Marcus Muhammad elected with a majority over Hightower, the puppet of Whirlpool and Wall Street.
Oh, absolutely. That is the whole plan, because what we're doing now, we're building. We're trying to build for the future. That's the number one plan, and that's why we're out here every single day, knocking on doors, talking to people, trying to educate them exactly what's going on in the community and around the country, because people need to know. Most times people don't really care. If they got a house, a car, and a job, they They don't care what's going on in the world, and they're able to feed their children. They care less about what's happening next door. But what we're trying to do, your brother next door is your brother. So we have to learn to work together and stand together.
Very well said. Any news now from other places in Michigan? Right? I think this week the news was that the courts or the proceeding with the Detroit bankruptcy. This was going on, and
absolutely. And here's the thing: the water they gave them a 30-day situation where they were not going to cross anybody water. Starting the 15th of September, they're going to continue. They're going to start cutting people water off again in Detroit. I'm going to be in Detroit on Monday speaking to the legal guild, and that's at 6 o'clock. I wish I had the address, but it's for the legal guild in Detroit. I'll be there at 6 o'clock. We're going to have dinner, and I'm going to be speaking to them in reference to the water situation in Detroit, and see can I get some of those attorneys to start working with the people in the city of Detroit.
All right, Reverend, why don't you send us the address of the legal guild, and we can put that on Twitter and try to get people to come. See you soon.
Absolutely, I will be able to do that. But remember this: whatever you do, please, people out there, if you can afford it, send up some a donation so we can go to the Supreme Court.
Well said. Okay, Reverend. See you next week, and good luck in the meantime. Crisis Radio, Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, this was our segment where we were going to hear from James Hinton, congressional candidate in the 5th Congressional District out there in California. You probably saw James Hinton getting quite active during the Jerry Brown cash carry debate yesterday. But since James Hinton is fortunately, I guess, he's so tied up taping a statement that's going to go out on television in California in the time of the election campaign, we thought we would get in somebody who knows his campaign quite well and has been in the district, actually was there on the day of the earthquake in Napa, and that's Daniela Walls, the president of the Tax Wall Street Party, right, which is supporting and endorsing James Hinton. So let's get Daniela to tell us what's going on there in the 5th of California and in the big picture as well.
Okay, yeah, I was in the earthquake. So, yeah, let's start by talking about James. Like you said, he's running for Congress in California's 5th District, and I don't want to miss a minute of that. So then if we have time later, I can tell you what I learned about last month on my listening tour in different states, working with our different candidates. But James Hinton is in Napa, and he's a very special candidate in a modern situation. And it's very important for listeners to become familiar with James by first visiting his website, hintonforcongress.com, hintonforcongress.com. On the website, you can read his 12-page program for an economic recovery. And, okay, so here's the situation. He already won the primary and is head-to-head with Mike Thompson. Mike Thompson's the establishment 9-term incumbent Wall Street Democrat in the pocket of the banks, insurance companies, and Walmart and Home Depot. And being in the pocket of the insurance companies, this blocks any health care reform, or as James is saying, Medicare for all. And also being in the pocket of Walmart and Home Depot, which is interesting because other candidates are usually just in the pocket of the banks, but he happens to be in the pocket of Walmart and Home Depot, which means that's going to block any increase in the minimum wage. And there's a big fight for 15 in California right now. And as we always say, California is a modern state which sets the stage for things to happen in other states. So these big employers are coming in with guns blazing. They don't want this to happen. So you will get no minimum wage increase if Thompson gets in. In California, unlike other states, there's a different primary system. People call it different names. They call it a jungle primary or an open primary where the two guys, so even if it's two Democrats or two Republicans, can be the last two standing in November on the day we vote November 4th. So in this case, James is an independent with the Tax Wall Street Party's platform who's running against, like I said, a Wall Street Democrat. So the Republicans are out in this election. And again, if California is the most modern state, then we're in a really modern situation. So this is a chance right now for us to expose what's wrong with the Democrats. We are going head-to-head with the corrupt Democrats. So it's down with Thompson and the establishment Democrats. Really quickly, I don't want to run out of time before I get this out. This weekend and early this week, the Hinton campaign is going to be in Santa Rosa, leafleting the town. James will be doing walking tours in Santa Rosa. If you want to meet with him, meet the candidate, and leaflet the area with us in Santa Rosa, email hintonforcongress@gmail.com, hintonforcongress@gmail. I will tell you where the candidate is. You can come and shake hands with him, have a conversation, and help us out by canvassing. So join us in the streets in Santa Rosa in California's 5th District. Soon on his website there will be a schedule of events, hintonforcongress.com, but until I can put that up, and until the middle of this week, he will be near Sonoma State University in Santa Rosa. Email me, and I'll get right back to you. And we need the manpower on the ground because we need to get a flyer on every door. So if you're a listener and you're not in the 5th District, maybe you're in San Francisco or Oakland or another nearby metropolitan area, come take a drive up for the day. It's only about 45 minutes away, and we'll be there. So here's the other thing with James. He won the primary with $187. And he got, Webster, 12% of the vote, which is a very large percentage for an independent anywhere. And he did this just by shaking hands. He had no materials. He just went door to door talking to people. He went downtown and just talked. Then he contacted the Tax Wall Street Party and told us he wanted to run on our platform. So ever since then, we helped him out with a website and flyers and materials. But when I was in Napa with him, he has to campaign full-time now. And we insist that he does campaign full-time because this is historic and he has to do it. But there's no money for him even to print these flyers. He's done this all with his own money, for gas, and he went to Brooks Brothers with coupons, doubled up the coupons and bought clothes for the debates. And he's done that all. And like I said, he did just getting the amount of signatures was only $187. But the printing now is adding up. He needs to put a flyer in the hand of every person in the 5th District. This weekend, he needs to put a flyer, just this weekend, or, early next week, he needs to put a flyer in the hand of everybody in Santa Rosa. The listeners who can't be on the ground in California need to help James, if nothing else, just to get his printing done. I know I've asked this before for candidates, but you please donate to hintonforcongress.com, hintonforcongress.com. Every one of these guys is our candidates, and that special group of listeners who donates is going to have to come forward again and help me and help them be personally responsible and help you, because, like I said, these are our candidates, and they're the listeners' candidates. And one dinner for some people could be a couple hundred flyers put into the hands of people with the platform for an economic recovery. These flyers educate people and teach people how we can get back on track for a better standard of living for all of us. And also, Hinton's a terrific guy, and he's an excellent candidate. And his opponent, who I got to know, Thompson, is an ogre. This is a race. That's too extreme.
That's scientifically accurate.
Oh, okay. This is a race that can have national impact as well. We're in the San Francisco media market. Hinton has a chance of winning as well here, but no matter what, we're going to get a big enough percentage of the vote to make a splash, and that splash is going to raise the necessary questions of our time. And you and I talked about how this is interesting because it's post-Republican territory. The Republicans in this race are gone now, and it's a question of Wall Street Democrats against a real populist. Hinton is a much better deal than the Elizabeth Warrens, as you call her, Miss Prim, who has already retreated on the 0.75% student loans from the Fed. James Hinton is saying 0% student loans and student loan refinancing from the Fed, period. Simple. This guy's a real fighter. He is not a retreater. This guy will never retreat. Warren doesn't have a systematic objection to Wall Street the way Hinton does.
Right.
Warren and Bernie Sanders never get to anything clear, Webster. It's all in this exhaustive regulation, and that stuff never really amounts to much. All these regulations are so complex and they're academic, whereas Hinton is more of an everyman, and he's saying 1% tax on Wall Street transactions, deal with it. He says no more tweaks to Obamacare, never-ending compromises, Medicare for all, period. Stop foreclosures on primary residences and farms. Simple stuff, one-line stuff, one-page stuff. And you're better than I am on this dynamic of the Elizabeth Warrens and Bernie Sanders and why they're not the best progressive choice, that we need real fighters.
And Daniela, concerning this campaign finance reform, right, so much hot air about this. If you win, you qualify in a primary with $187 in an important and wealthy congressional district, I say that's campaign finance reform in action. You beat, you beat the Republican, beat whoever there was, with $187. That's the way you show that money doesn't dominate. You win an election.
It proves campaign finance reform isn't the real issue. HintonForCongress.com. HintonForCongress.com. Bye-bye, Webster.
Bye-bye. See you next week. Okay, James Hinton. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. All right, now as we continue our panorama of struggle, right, the hopeful things and the forward-looking things that are occurring in the political landscape here that you won't hear about on MSNBC or Fox News, but here you will. Let's now check into the heartland, and this means going to Nebraska, to Lincoln, Nebraska, where, of course, we're very supportive of the Senate campaign, United States Senate campaign of Dan Berdorf, who last week did such a good job in exposing Ben Sasse, the Republican golden boy, in the Nebraska Senate debate at the Cattlemen and Rural Radio Network sponsored event there at the Nebraska State Fair. So let's go to Dan Berdorf and get an update on what he's been up to. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Webster. How are you?
Good. Glad to hear from you.
Thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Always. Every week.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, I'd love to draw your attention to an article published on September 2nd by Darcy Richardson on uncoveredpolitics.com. It's called The Ghost of Legendary Wall Street Nemesis Appears in Nebraska Senate Race. And again, this is by Darcy Richardson, who's a former guest on your show. And in it, Mr. Richardson puts our fight against Wall Street speculation, especially what we're doing here in Nebraska, in a historical perspective. And I want to encourage everyone to read this. It's also published on worldausterityReport.net. And World Austerity Report has been very generous in their coverage of my campaign. And I encourage everyone to read this for the historical perspective. And because Mr. Richardson sets this against the background of the recent U.S. Senate debate that you just mentioned. It took place in Grand Island, Nebraska at the State Fair. And you mentioned it was hosted by the Cattlemen Association and Rural Radio Network. In the article, Mr. Richardson said my candidacy is having, and this is a quote, a positive impact this autumn by forcing my opponents to address the substantive issues facing the country. And then Richardson points out that we're championing a 1% tax on Wall Street. Again, I'm quoting here. Championing a 1% tax on Wall Street transactions, a Medicare for all health care program, and agricultural parity, while boldly calling for the nationalization of the Federal Reserve to provide public credit for the nation's mounting infrastructure needs. And then Richardson points out that I won the debate in Grand Island by advocating for the American system of political economy. And this is the Hamiltonian policies on which the nation was founded. And quoting again, an FDR-inspired economic program designed to strengthen and expand America's battered and dwindling middle class. I was also the only candidate in the Heartland Event Center last Monday, according to Richardson, who offered realistic solutions to the country's seemingly never-ending economic decline, a post-recession economy in which most Americans are worried, pessimistic, and worse off than they were before the financial crisis caused by Wall Street's avarice and irresponsible recklessness. And then towards the end, he says, according to most economists, the Great Recession supposedly ended 5 years ago. But Berdorf and most Nebraskans know differently, and that, Webster, is very true. I was able to attend an event at the Food Bank for the Heartland this week in Omaha, Nebraska. The Food Bank for the Heartland is the largest local food bank in the area, and Food Bank for the Heartland serves 93 counties in Nebraska and Iowa, and it works with the organizing group Feeding America, which is a larger group that works with food banks around the country. And the facts about hunger in our community here in Nebraska are eye-opening. I mean, Nebraskans Nebraska doesn't experience the booms and busts that affect the other parts of the nation, but the economic depression has not been kind here to Nebraska. About 21,900 different people in the food bank for the Heartland Service area receive emergency food assistance in any given week, and about 20% of the children in Nebraska and western Iowa are at risk for hunger. And so, to put that in perspective, in Omaha, Nebraska, in Douglas County alone, over 24,000, almost 25,000 children are at risk for hunger. And almost 16% of the Nebraskans reported at least one time in the last 12 months when they didn't have enough money to buy food that they or their family needed. So this is worse. I think this is much worse around the country than it is here in Nebraska. But still, like 52% of the clients served by the food bank of the Heartland, they had to choose. They report having to choose between paying for food and utilities, and 19% of these people are homeless. So this is the situation in Nebraska, and I'll say it's worse than other parts of the country. And it's going to get worse if the supplemental nutrition assistance program is cut. SNAP, of course. You got it, SNAP. Formerly known as
food stamps.
Right,
food stamps.
Yes. And it's the largest program in the social safety net. And in 2013, 180,000 Nebraskans, or about 10% of the population, received SNAP benefits. And that had an economic impact in Nebraska of almost $7.5 million. So SNAP provides food to hungry children. Nearly half of the SNAP participants are children. It helps get people back on their feet because most people spend less than 2 years on SNAP, and half of the people that are on SNAP leave the program within 9 months. And it also increases the number of farm jobs. So for every $1 billion in retail food, that creates 3,300 farm jobs. And this provides economic stimulus in state and local economies, because every $1 of SNAP benefits that's accessed generates $1.84 of economic activity. So I asked the good people at the food bank for the Heartland what I could do to help them as my candidacy takes off, and in the future how Canada could help. And they pointed out that the biggest challenge that they are facing in these times is the dramatic increase in first-time users of the food bank. So these are new users that are experiencing food insecurity for the first time. That means that they don't know where their next meal is coming from or where their children's next meal is coming from. And in Nebraska, that is 1 in 5 children and 1 in 7 adults at any given time might not know where their next meal is coming from. That's amazing. That's astounding. 1 in 5 children and 1 in 7 adults.
And let me just point out, Dan, the amazing irony of all this is it's the greatest corn production machine on this planet.
Right.
And people are starving in the midst of plenty because of the Wall Street speculative arrangements.
And if you recall, a few weeks ago, I was on your program and I pointed out that 1 in 5 hamburgers in America come from Nebraska. So that if you eat a hamburger, you have a 1 in 5 chance that beef is from Nebraska. And in that situation, you have people that don't know where their next meal is coming from. So the whole system is wrecked. And if you recall that recent Mitch McConnell leaked talk from last week, where he said that Republicans plan to take aim at these social safety nets like SNAP and other social safety programs, this would be a disaster not only for America, but for my people here in Nebraska, the working poor and the people who are just working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet so they can afford food. And some of these people are the clients of the food bank that I was just talking about. So you know that we can't cut a social safety net during a depression. But my opponent, Ben Sass, plans to do just that, I'm afraid. And I want to stop him, and I have a plan to do it, and it's at danfromnebraska.com. So I encourage you to go there. Like I said, a lot of these people that are being serviced by the food bank here in Nebraska and also across the country, they're working 2 or 3 jobs. And we spoke at the food bank about how the economy has been pushed into a service economy. You know, a lot of people are saying that the economy shifted into a service economy, but I say that it's been pushed into a service economy. So that these people are working 2 or 3 jobs, and they can't meet their needs for even the most basic necessities in life. And this is putting a lot of new pressures on resources like your local food bank. And we agreed when we talked at the food bank this week, hunger in America is a symptom of a bigger problem, a much bigger problem. And the best way to feed these people is to have a system, an American system, where a person can get a good-paying job, a highly productive job, a high-value job, so he can or she can buy the good-quality food from their wages that they make. And you have a tough time of doing this when all your jobs are being sent out of the country and replaced by these low-wage service jobs. So please go to Dan for Nebraska. I hope your listeners will do that.
Absolutely.
And take a look and follow me on Twitter and Facebook.
And we'll see you next week. And vote yourself in economic recovery by voting for Dan Burdorf, U.S. Senate, Nebraska. Thank you, Dan. Come back next week.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. And we'll be back in a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, to round out the picture, let's go to an election which is occurring next Tuesday for most voters, and that is to say the New York State Democratic primary. It's Wall Street Democrat Andrew Cuomo. It's Foundation left Soros clone Zephyr Teachout, and then a guy that I prefer to call a Franklin D. Roosevelt Democrat rather than other labels that might be stuck on him. That would be Randy Credico, the colorful and hard-driving candidate for governor of the Empire State. So, Randy, we've come now to the end of the campaign. We congratulate you. You forced your way onto Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. They didn't give you much time. They were obviously favoring Zephyr Teachout and her friend Wu, but you got the main stuff in there, the Wall Street sales tax and everything that goes with it. So tell us how you see things now a few days before the vote.
Well, you're right about yesterday. It should have been just me and her, not to really be like Biden and Obama versus the Republican nominee, and that's it. So they did stack the deck yesterday, and that guy's such a slow-speaking neophyte. Look, really is, I don't know, these two cookie cutouts, I don't know where they came from. Their politics are not that good. As I've said, Cuomo's a Lieberman Democrat. This woman is a Clinton Democrat, and she won't condemn Obama for any of whether it be Syria, Iraq, the surge, Wall Street bailouts. She's with them all the way. So somehow she's become the Queen of Diamonds, that's foisted herself on as the new progressive like Obama did in 2008. So you got that going there, and she's fooled a lot of the left and the Upper West Side liberals. But, that being said, and she keeps asking me to drop out of the race because she's got a pipe dream of winning here. And she just doesn't know what's going on. She has no, I came up with things yesterday, 421A. She asked me what that was. I said she lived here longer than any pre-K kid that's been here in New York longer than her. Any kid in pre-K, 4 years, been here longer than her. It's hard to get to know this state. But I'm looking at, I think we're going to do okay. I don't know how well. The New York Times has decided to black us out. They have in the beginning because the people on the board, on their executive board, certainly don't share my values, and they can prop up, like you said, a Soros-created candidate who certainly does not endorse my economic platform. She's not going to call out for the Tobin tax, let alone my tax, which is beyond the Tobin tax.
Randy, look, what I thought about that debate, here we are, Randy, if I may, we're about, 2.5 years, 3 years after Occupy Wall Street, and Zephyr Teachout comes out there with zero proposals to do anything about Wall Street. No reforms, no nothing, except this watered-down stuff about campaign finance reform, which is very easy to get around.
Let me tell you, this campaign finance reform, all it does is equal the playing field for the Democrats, which are owned by the same people. It doesn't really do anything, and it's a false issue as far as I'm concerned, because I ran for mayor, and all it did last year with the campaign finance laws in New York City, which are the strictest in the world, is give the Democrats, the incumbents, it's Incumbent Protection Act. So let's not say that does anything. It's a red herring from dealing with real issues in this state. As I said the other day in the Huffington Post, whoever, I don't know, of course, you write for the Huffington Post, it's the same wages that Kunta Kinte got. But they're nice people. I get a lot of things in there. And I must say that the piece that I wrote the other day, laying out a comprehensive economic package for the state, rather than getting bogged down on this corruption scandal that is nothing but a distraction from issues. I mean, we have 65% black youth unemployment. You've got 20%, 22% real unemployment here. If you take a look at that U6 figure, which includes those who've given up looking and those who are working 12 hours a week at $6 an hour. I mean, take all of those wage earners, and it's about 20% in this state. So I want you to know that we must concentrate on revitalizing the economy, which I've said the only way to do it, since the economy is so dead and manufacturing ain't happening, is to tax those who've exploited, who've been given all these tax breaks and been given favoritism, and that is the banks and Wall Street. They have got to pay their patriotic share. You know, we're all New Yorkers, we're all Americans, and, you know, people fight wars for them and they all get rich. This is the time for them to cough up for the work that they haven't done. They just stood on the sidelines and collected a toll on the human misery. So it's time for them to like I said, to pay their patriotic share and put their fellow New Yorkers back to work.
Randy, if I could, she says that as governor, this is Zephyr Teachout again, as governor of New York, she won't be making foreign policy. This is absolutely wrong. The United Nations is there. The governor of New York is a foreign policy power. What I was thinking, one thing that might be effective is to challenge her to say that if Zephyr Teachout becomes governor of New York, she will do everything to block the New York State National Guard, which is a big piece of it, from going to Iraq again on some idiotic neocon fool's errand. I think that would put her on the spot. Zephyr, pledge you will block the New York Guard from being sent into foreign wars.
Do you think that the New York Times would give her any kind of coverage if, in fact, she made that kind of declaration? Absolutely not. You know, she can't even attack. You know, she has no position on the recent, incursion in Gaza. There's no position at all. I know it's suicide to take a position there, one way or the other. You know, if you take one side, it's a wedge. It becomes one of these wedge issues, as you so clearly point out. You can't. It's third rail is to say, hey, look, anything short of the Ariel Sharon plan, a politician is done here. I mean, Bill de Blasio's real last name is Wilhelm. He had to change his name from being his real last name is Bill. You ever seen Italian 7 foot?
Warren Wilhelm.
It's Warren Wilhelm, and he changed his first and last name. Even though his father was a World War II hero who lost the leg, he threw him under the bus. This is how sick the culture is, where people can't be honest. I said on Amy's show that, you know, she should take a position, and she wouldn't take a foreign policy position. And you're right, this is the capital of the world. Your UN is here, banking, Wall Street, this is the capital of the world. Anything that happens overseas, they're going to have repercussions here. People who want to attack, where do they want to attack? They want to attack here. We keep screwing around in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya. We're pissing off the whole planet. And where does it redound? Right here.
And very specifically on that, Randy, this whole business with Ukraine, right? The lunacy that we saw at the NATO summit in the past couple of days. Everybody knows if the United States and Russia get into a war, what's the number one target? It's called the city of New York.
Right.
And
why would you antagonize
she's
them?
got to say something. No war with Russia. Stay out of Ukraine. Hands off Ukraine.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, why would we antagonize a nation that can annihilate us? Why would we want to starve them with sanctions? Why would we want? What's the point of it? I mean, is that what we want? A nuclear war or something like? I mean, who's behind all of this? You know, we got to stop it, stay away from the Ukraine, and join partners with Russia. And not with these neo-fascists that are running the Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Randy Credico. The website is Credico 2014. Give him a donation now. It's in the last days of the campaign.
Credico2014.com. You can give a donation, or you can come out over the weekend and help us out. Just go there, email me, Credico2014.
Here on World Crisis Radio for the 5th of September edition. Credico, with that, is appealing to the biggest pool of votes in the Democratic Party. It's the anti-war vote. Cuomo has nothing to offer, and Zephyr Teachout won't even take a position against new wars in the Middle East. So Credico 2014, and let me invite you to go out and vote for Randy Credico next Tuesday in the New York Democratic primary. And That's a vote for content and for program. You've heard it. And it's also the best protest vote. You get more bang for your buck out of a protest vote for Credico than you do for the very complacent and mild foundation-linked Soros clone Zephyr Teach Out. All right, now we got to do ISIS quickly here at the close. You want to solve the problem there in Iraq with ISIS. Here's what you do. You tell the Turks, a NATO country, close that border. No assistance can go across. No more border traffic. Blockade ISIS, starve them out. You tell the Gulf, you tell Saudis, Qatar, the rest of them, Gulf Cooperation Council, no more money, no more logistics for ISIS. Cut that off. You also invite the Saudis, say, look, you have religious scholars, you have these ulema, right? You have the scholars. Where are the fatwas condemning ISIS as a monstrosity? Same thing for Qatar. How about that guy, Taradawi, the big star of Al Jazeera in Arabic? Why doesn't he condemn ISIS? Will he do it? I haven't heard it so far. And then use the armies you've got. The Turkish army is big and capable, and the U.S. has been paying huge military aid to Turkey. The Syrian army, help them. Don't bomb them, help them. And there's no way down the middle. And the Iraqi army, right? Revive them, revive the Kurds, revive whatever you like. Now, the big debate is, do you bomb Syria? Why not help the Syrians to take care of their own internal problems, provide targeting, provide information, and let them attack. Let them take this guy Baghdadi and hurl him into eternity as required. So you also have cooperation from Iran and from Russia, right? We're told that Russia has provided MiGs and trainers for Syria to make up some of their losses. So we've also got to defeat this idiotic theory voiced this past week by Richard Engel that Assad helped ISIS by attacking the other groups. That's simply because ISIS was all the way out in Raqqa and Assad had to deal with threats near the Damascus central point. You notice that ISIS was trying to avoid where the fight was. So there's obviously some kind of a briefing paper going around that has 15 to 17 airstrips controlled by Assad that some people in Washington want to bomb. That's absolutely insane, and you will be impeached if you do that, Obama. Then you've also got McCain, right, an exchange on Greta Van Susteren that seemed to reveal more than usual the idea that McCain wanted to fund ISIS or ISIL back in 2012, 2013, and apparently it was Obama personally who said no. So there's an interesting point going on. Now, we've already gone through the stuff that ISIS has a large contingent of sociopaths. Remember Musawi, Zacharias Musawi, the 13th or whatever he was of 2001. His own lawyers pled that he was a paranoid schizophrenic and tried to get him off, and they didn't get anywhere. Let's also look at Pakistan. What's going on in Pakistan? Is somebody destabilizing Pakistan with a color revolution? We need to know. Notice that Zawahiri is targeting India. Well, of course, when you see Modi appearing at a BRICS meeting with Putin and the rest of the BRICS, then the U.S. acquires a motive to send in al-Qaeda. Zawahiri is trying to deliver. He's trying to make sure he keeps his grant, not just ISIS, but al-Qaeda, of course. So Zawa is out there targeting India, and that has 180 million Muslims, right, as the British India office always reminded us. And then, of course, Richard Reed was also a mentally ill person, right, from the Brixton Finsbury Mosque Axis, the shoe bomber. All right. Now, that's what needs to be done in that part of the world. Now, a couple of things. Draghi, the European Central Bank. Let's examine this hypothesis. Will there be some kind of a instability crash, correction, whatever, in October or thereabouts? Draghi is now looking at the specter of deflation in the European Union because of these lunatic austerity policies, right, that he has and not prevented, right? Which others, Cameron, we can thank Cameron and above all Merkel, right? Draghi, according to the Washington Post editorial today, Draghi was reacting to a rash of dire economic data showing that Europe was slipping dangerously close to inflation. So here's what he's done. The European Central Bank interest rate for zombie banks is now 0.5%, 1/20th of 1%, a nominal fee. And he's going to start his own QE. He's going to begin buying toxic derivatives. It says here, a program of security purchases, says the Washington Post, meaning buying up toxic derivatives, fear of deflation. The European economy flatlining. How would you do it? Well, I would say, good. Keep your 0.05% interest rate. That's fine. We can live with that. But not for zombie banks, not for hedge fund hyenas, but for production. Production meaning tangible, physical production, building infrastructure, manufacturing commodities, agriculture, other improvements, scientific research. Get your space program going. Get your scientific research program going. Basically 0% loans from the European Central Bank over long periods. And if you're going to have any effect, right, you, Italy, France, maybe Italy, Spain, hard to say, right? You, Portugal, you, Greece, then fight for the 0% interest rate. Otherwise, we're told that the sanctions from NATO, according to Colonel Blimp over there, right, Perfide Cameron, he's telling us that the sanctions are being worked on and will be made available soon. The big word this week was that it would be sanctions targeting European bonds. The Russians would then respond, right? If the Russians say, we won't buy Russian bonds, if the NATO bloc says we won't buy European bonds, Russian bonds, then Russia turns around and says, great, we won't buy European bonds and we won't buy U.S. bonds. And by the way, we have 300 to 400 billion in treasury securities that we are now dumping. That is panic. So as he says, Putin, don't mess with Russia. It's pointless. Don't start military adventures. Ask Hitler, ask Napoleon, ask Charles of Sweden. Not good. Ask various Polish generals. It's a fool's errand. Now, a couple of things. Republican Party looking real bad. McDonnell and his wife found guilty in Virginia of corruption. Now, remember, this guy was the model of the holy roller. He was the Christian elected official. He was in there with transvaginal wands. He was associated with Ken Cuccinelli, who ran for governor now and failed. Republican Party in Virginia looking really bad. 0 statewide offices. The only places they can win are in their gerrymandered state legislature, Senate, and Assembly. So think what this means, right? A Republican presidential hopeful. But also look at this. McDonnell knocked out, Christie knocked out, Perry knocked out. I've been saying that that's Jeb Bush, but now I'm seeing that may be Mitt. It may be a united front at this point of Mitt and Jeb. Hard to say. Jesse Benton has quit Mitch McConnell, showing that the Paul Todd machine was corrupt. And we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio.